I'm Matt Doran. Here, from the case files of Crime Investigation Australia, are two stories of cold-hearted, cowardly men who ordered others to kill their wives. Later, we'll relate a very Sydney tale of a millionaire businessman whose uncontrolled greed led him to take out a hit on his faithful spouse. But first, one of the most heartbreaking cases is that of Australian boxing's royal family and a cruel, domineering father who brutalised his sons, driving one of them, a national champion, to commit murder.
Bit quicker, left, right, to the body.
This cocky bantamweight is Cess Waters. He's father to 3 champion boxers.
Come on! On the retreat, fight!
But nothing the boys face in the ring is as brutal or unforgiving as Cess Waters himself. He drives his sons relentlessly. He dominates and rages at them until they have no will of their own, as the eldest son, Dean, remembers.
First of all, the shouting, the screaming, and just the absolute rage, you know, like veins would pop in his neck and his face would just become almost purple, just with sheer rage and anger, and he'd sometimes froth at the mouth.
It is the uncontrolled rage of his father that will drive Dean Waters to a crime that will haunt him for the rest of his life. It's 1988. On the New South Wales Central Coast, Alan Hall, a local horsebreaker, is found lying in a pool of blood. He's been ambushed and killed by 2 gunmen. Hall, a petty criminal, has a reputation for not repaying debts, and he's been charged with homosexual assault and drug dealing. Rumours suggest he destroyed a handicapped man's marriage by having an affair with his wife. Months before Hall was killed, police received an unsigned letter alleging he had been seen heavily drugged and firing a rifle he didn't have a licence for.
I was aware of Alan Hall. I had been involved in a matter prior to the murder. In actual fact, it was a minor drug matter.
After having his house shot at and then burgled, a more ominous threat follows in February 1988 when Hall's home is torched by arsonists. 4 months later, on June 29th, Hall and his girlfriend Christine, who happens to be Cess Waters' wife, are watching television when they're disturbed by their dogs barking wildly. Hall goes outside to investigate. He sees nothing out of the ordinary.
Hey, Danny, dog, what's the matter with you?
So he cracks his stock whip to silence the animals. A split second later, 3 shotgun blasts ring out. He's killed instantly. Within 4 hours of Hall's death, police are swarming over the Kulnura property owned by Cess. They're aware of problems between Cess, his wife Christine, and her lover, the dead man, Alan Hall.
Christine Waters, the estranged wife of Cess Waters, and Dean's stepmother, had complained to police about harassment by Cess Waters and by other members of the family.
Cess had actually encouraged Hall and Christine to enter into a sexual relationship, but he's shocked and enraged when they fall in love and move in together. Waters demands blood.
He wanted them to have sex. That was his thing. He wanted them to have sex, and he wanted to watch and then join in, and it was that threesome thing, you know. And when he lost control of the situation, when he lost control of his being able to manipulate my mum to do whatever he wanted, or Alan, he turned nasty. And especially, I think, was that my mum was actually starting to show feelings for this guy, you know, in a romantic way, which didn't sit too well with my dad.
The coming together of Alan Hall, Cess and Christine in itself was bizarre, where Cess had a number of dogs, a large number of dogs up there, but he also had a number of horses. And those horses were unbroken. And he engaged Alan Hall to break in those horses. Alan Hall did that. Cess didn't have the money to pay him and offered Alan Hall his wife in lieu of payment. Now, that's a bizarre scenario, but that did in fact happen. And of course, Christine and Alan fell in love. Alan showed Christine affection that Cess had never showed her. And she ran away with Alan Hall. And of course, Cess then became the aggrieved husband.
The Waters link to the murder sparks a media frenzy. Cess and his sons, Dean, Troy and Guy, are regarded as the royal family of Australian boxing. The press knows Cess as an eccentric Englishman who left the UK in the 70s to raise his children in the Australian bush, far away from what he calls the temptations of the concrete jungle.
I don't smoke and don't drink, so straight away there's a clash of personalities. Then when I start bringing in some of the other things, well, it just doesn't do. And they say to themselves, this bloke's some kind of a weirdo. Some kind of a weirdo, you know?
But no outsider knows the skeletons in his closet. Having served time in England's toughest jails, Cess Waters knows the trouble young men can get into. He believes that, like lions, children need to be tamed. And he'd boast that if tamed properly, they'll even kill for you. His family, Christine, the boys and a daughter, Tracy, live in constant terror of his violent rages.
He was quite a brutal man, and I don't believe that Cess had any of the normal human traits of love and affection, that type of thing, those feelings. I think to Cess that was a sign of weakness, and he treated people that showed those type of feelings with disdain, with contempt, and that's how he treated his family.
The son of a wife-beating alcoholic, Cess Waters grew up in the slums of North England. To say he had a colourful background would be an understatement. While he threatened to kill his children if they turned out gay, he was known to have indulged in homosexual affairs during a stint in prison. He played bit parts in crime movies. He forced his kids to accompany him on holidays to nudist camps. He was wrongly accused of murdering his third wife. His fifth wife, Christine, was forced to work as a prostitute to bankroll his dream of raising 3 world champion boxers. He bragged about knowing Britain's most notorious criminals and imposed a demented, godlike control over his family.
I'm supposed to be some kind of a lunatic. I don't think so. I think I'm some kind of a very, very shrewd parent.
We had to pee in a bucket in the middle of the room. He would always he wouldn't allow us to go and use the toilet at night. So we had this bucket in the middle of the lounge room, and we would have to, if we got up, we'd have to go and wee in this bucket. And there were times when he would be there and he would hold my penis while I was weeing into the bucket, and I used to feel very, very inferior and just like yucky. I just didn't want him to touch me.
We had no money and we had no job, but we still gave it a go.
But strangers never see that side of Cess Waters. Indeed, he trains his children to hide the truth about his evil nature by making them rehearse answers to questions the media might ask about family relationships. Waters further dehumanises his family by allowing a pack of mangy dogs and cats to live in their ramshackle farmhouse.
Feces and mess and filth everywhere continuously. And yet we had to live like that, you know, and how do young men, you know, allow that? Well, you know, for us there was no choice in it. You know, I may have been 24 going on 25, still living at home, living under these filthy conditions because we were controlled. The last beating I actually received from my father was when I was 25, and actually at the time I was a professional heavyweight boxing champion of Australia, you know, and I was getting a beating from a guy that was probably up to my neckline. But that was the kind of hold my father had over me and my brothers.
Yet Dean always strives to live up to the expectations that make him his father's special boy.
I was always my dad's favourite, you know, like he would always tell me that I was his special boy, you know. He always made me feel like, you know, he loved me more than anyone else, you know. And that meant a lot to me, you know. My father was my world.
But the time would soon come when his status as Cess's favourite son would also make him a soldier, prepared to follow any order, even an order to murder his mother and her lover.
In the boxing ring, Dean Waters and his brothers are being lauded as potential world champions, and they experience a rare adulation.
You box your fight today better than you've ever boxed a fight before.
But on their farm at Kulnura, the arrival of Alan Hall upsets Cess's balance of power, and the charade that they are the perfect family is about to be shattered.
He felt that because my mum had left him and she was living with another fella, that it was going to damage our great boxing name in this country and hurt our marketability.
You're weak! You're pansy! You're a pansy!
So he had a big problem with that, and what would happen is continually when I came up for training, there would be this bombardment over months and months that something had to be done.
I want it real deal.
Dean becomes Cess's messenger boy, running threats of serious reprimands to Christine if she doesn't return.
That's going good.
However, Dean only realises the gravity of Cess's plan when he is made to dig 2 graves deep in the bush, one for Christine and one for Hall.
I kept thinking, God, I can't do this. And I've actually voiced that, and I said, look, isn't there any other way? Can't we do this another way? And again, he just tore into me and started to abuse me, told me that I was yellow and I was a coward and I was no good.
Cess also targets Dean's best friend, 25-year-old mechanic Damon Cooper, to help fulfil his murderous plan.
Go on, some more.
After relentless badgering, which borders on brainwashing, Cess orders both Dean and friend Damon to kill the lovers. There's no escape from Cess's domination. Dean has been trained to do as he's told since birth, and Damon just isn't mentally strong enough to resist the order. And so, on the night of June 29, 1988, the 2 men embark on their murderous mission.
So yeah, we climbed through the fence, walked up the drive and just positioned ourselves on the side of the drive, and after a short time, Alan came out to see why the dogs were barking. He went back, and then it was during that time that he'd gone back that Damon had actually lost his nerve.
Damon, what are you doing? No.
I just reassured him and explained to them that we had to do this. It's what my dad wanted, you know. And I mean, I wish I could have just walked away with him, you know, but for me, there wasn't an option, you know. It's easy to look back now and go, but yeah, there was. You could have just walked away. It just wasn't like that. It just wasn't that easy. I ended up throwing a bucket, I do believe. Got the dogs barking. Then Alan's walked back out, and I heard what sounded like a gun going off. I found out later it was Alan cracking the bullwhip to stop the dogs from barking, and it was during that time when he was standing there. I can just remember seeing his silhouette. I just pointed the gun towards him, and yeah, I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. I've jumped up and I've shot 2 more times, even though he'd already hit the ground. You know, he wasn't there, but it was just reflex action. As I turned and started to run, after firing the 3rd shot, I heard Damon discharge his rifle.
Although Cess has given the order that Christine also is to be killed, Dean finds it impossible to murder the woman he's always called his mum.
And it was only on the actual night that I convinced myself that I couldn't do it. You know, I was trying to work a way out of this. The magnitude of this thing was just too big for me. You know, like I couldn't get around it. And probably half an hour before the shooting actually happened, I decided I can't hurt my mum. I can't hurt her. And I remember thinking, I hope my dad's going to be okay with that.
With Hall dead, Dean and Damon run off in a blind panic. They throw dirt from another location over the car's carpet to cover their tracks in case the police examine the vehicle. Within hours of the ambush, police raid Cess's farm and the house Dean had recently moved into.
They've come to the door, knocked on the door. I mean, I was still awake. I couldn't sleep. I was just laying in the bed, and I was just, you know, every time I closed my eyes, I could see the silhouette of Alan. I was just trying to come to terms with the gravity of the crime I just committed.
After the police enter Dean's house, he sees something that makes his blood run cold.
As I walked in the house and I looked into the bathroom, I could see the bathroom door was ajar, and there were the boots that I'd worn with the mud all over them, and the clothes with residue from the gun blast. And I've seen them, and I've just, I mean, I was already paralysed from what I'd done. Now these officers have come into my home. I'm going to jail there. It's all over, you know. I'm looking at 20 years.
Explain this. What's this all about?
That's just a video I've been meaning to watch.
Something distracted them. On my sideboard, I had a piece of paper, and written on the piece of paper was A Time to Kill, which was actually a movie I was told to get out. And they picked it up, and it just distracted them enough to wonder what all this was about, considering what had just happened. And it gave me enough time to just walk past the bathroom, just close the bathroom, and then I've gotten dressed and I've gone down to the police station to make a report. So I don't know what you call that, whether you call it luck or blessing or what, but you know, it was over the very first night, but it wasn't to be.
The gun used to kill Hall is quickly hidden on a property belonging to Damon Cooper's parents, before later being dumped in the nearby Wyong River. After his police interview, Dean disposes of the telltale boots and clothes. It's later revealed that Cess Waters, who's immediately classified as a suspect in the murder, uses his criminal cunning to hide evidence from the investigators.
Yeah, off you go. On you go.
Whilst the police were executing the search warrant and searching the premises, Cess looked down and he saw a .22 calibre cartridge, a spent case, that was lying on the floor. Cess picked it up and put it in his mouth, and he had it under his tongue whilst he actually spoke to the police.
You sure? No one's been with you?
Look, I've been here all night.
And in his haste to pick it up, he picked up not only the spent cartridge, but quite a bit of dog excrement that was on the lounge room floor. And of course that went into his mouth along with the spent cartridge.
When Dean meets Cess the following day, there is no pat on the back.
Why is it you can't do everything right? You was told, kill Alan, kill Christine.
And I remember when I went up to training in the morning, that morning, that he berated me and he was very angry that Christine was still alive. And the thing that really, I guess, I mean, I was already empty, I was lost. Truthfully, I was a dead man walking. I was just so empty inside. But when he said to me that I should have killed Christine as well, and then he said, then you should have actually come outside and shot Damon.
You should have killed Damon.
I can't explain what it did to me, you know, like, I don't know how I could have thought that by doing this terrible thing, that somehow everything was going to be better, that our life was going to suddenly work out.
You can't do anything right. You're just useless.
Dean's brother Troy is preparing for his IBF world title attempt with Italy's Gianfranco Rossi when police arrest Cess and Dean for the murder of Alan Hall.
While it turned out to be an ill-fated campaign, with Rossi winning on points, Troy received a massive boost as he prepared to fly to Europe when the judge dismissed the charges at the committal hearing because of insufficient evidence.
I feel we've been vindicated, and there's a big story to tell at some time in the future of intrigue and conspiracy, but that's another story.
While Dean celebrates his freedom outside the courthouse, it does nothing to ease his conscience when he's alone at night.
But there was an innocence that died. Something was different, and I honestly, I remember it, and I'll never forget it, that something died inside me, something changed. You know, like, I'd taken a life, and I knew I could never give it back. And I struggled with that for many, many years, and it almost pushed me to suicide, you know, because I couldn't deal with it.
Dean has refused to tell the police anything, but he does make a late-night confession to a local religious minister at nearby Terrigal Beach.
Dean just opened up. He just poured his heart out. He just talked me through the whole deal. And afterwards, I spoke to him about the importance, if he ever was going to have a clear conscience, that he had to go forward. He had to come forward to the police and ultimately tell the police.
As Cess continues to plot world title fights for Troy and Guy, Dean is drowning in a sea of despair. While he initially seeks refuge in Christianity, it's easier to move away to Melbourne and lose himself in the city's crime and drug scene.
It was a horrible lifestyle, but it was a place where I felt I fitted in, because they were all doing the wrong thing. I was struggling. We're all running away from different things, you know, and using the drugs and the alcohol just to mask, you know, our feelings.
Dean's fear the police will reopen the case is realised about 5 years later when Detective Dennis O'Toole confronts him. O'Toole knows a confession is the only way Hall's murder can ever be solved.
And I asked him whether he, in fact, had committed the murder of Alan Hall. And at that point, Dean, who was quite confident and brash, looked away and he couldn't look at me with the answer. And in fact, he didn't answer, he shrugged.
After 2 hellish years of fighting suicidal thoughts and dealing with hardened criminals, Dean Waters, now facing the responsibility of fatherhood himself, returns home to the Central Coast, bloated and emotionally spent.
But now there was this little niggling inside telling me that I needed to confess this. If I really wanted to clean my life up, I couldn't sweep that under the carpet and start life now. I had to actually go back and deal with that. And that was a horrifying thought, just because, you know, there was just so much I knew that I had to come out and be told. And I guess I feared my children finding out all this stuff, and I was worried about the effect it was going to have on them.
Pastor Kevin Brett puts Dean in touch with Manny Konditsis, a local solicitor. But it'll be another 12 months before Konditsis receives the green light to arrange a meeting with O'Toole.
He didn't mention the name at that stage, but he said, "Do you know who I'm talking about?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And we met the following day and in the solicitor's office, and walked in. And at that time, Dean indicated that he wanted to get this matter off his chest.
When I was asked by Detective O'Toole if I'd actually done the shooting, if I'd killed Alan Hall, I just remember it wouldn't come out because I'd lied for so long, and I just convinced myself that that was the way to deal with it, was to lie, 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 lie. It actually didn't come out straight away. But once I got it out, I said it again, and then it was all right.
On learning of Dean's confession, Damon Cooper turns himself in. Cess is taken into custody during a trip to Wyong. His attitude is in stark contrast to Dean's.
I think he was just in total denial. There was very little reaction from him at all. He was totally uncooperative. And quite aggressive in his own manner, I suppose I could describe.
Damon Cooper is the first to stand trial. His legal representative does not argue for him to be acquitted on the grounds that he wasn't acting of his own free will. His best result, based on the evidence, is manslaughter, and that's what he receives. 18 years with a minimum of 12. An appeal and plea to the governor for clemency fails.
Not long after Dean's confession, Cess Waters, now aged 70, dies of a heart attack. At Dean's trial, 3 psychologists, including the Crowns, say that Dean was suffering from an abnormality of the mind when he killed Hall. Armed with that, Conditsis moves for Dean to be tried for manslaughter, arguing he wasn't acting of his own free will. But the Director of Public Prosecutions insists Waters must face a murder charge. The court is bombarded with stories of the horrific upbringing Dean endured. Members of the jury openly weep when they hear the Waters children recount the horrors of their childhood.
Absolutely horrific. Allowing them to go to bed at night after he's chastised them, and then waking them up at 3 o'clock in the morning after they're in deep sleep and giving them a beating.
While Dean braces himself for a severe sentence, Conditsis senses that Dean might be acquitted. Yet he doesn't dare build up his client's hopes.
Dean left his keys to his house at home, believing he wouldn't need the keys because he wasn't returning home. He was going to go to jail. And that's how I wanted him to think. I wanted him to expect that the best result we could get here would be manslaughter.
The jury needs a mere 40 minutes to acquit Waters of all charges, and pandemonium breaks out.
Dean, almost in disbelief, sobbed and said thank you to the jury, and there were members of the jury that were crying as the verdict was delivered.
When the jury came back with their verdict of not guilty with Dean Waters, my reaction was probably I was stunned. It took some time to comprehend.
Dean Waters appreciates some people can't understand why he's walking free while Damon Cooper languishes in jail.
Are you shocked? I'm shattered. I'm shattered for my friend. You know, he'll be shattered when he hears this.
But it is pretty difficult to accept that the person who actually caused the death of another person walks free, while his accomplice, who didn't cause any damage to the deceased at all, gets 16 years jail. Even today, I find that a little bit difficult.
I can understand why the average person in the street thinks, well, look, how could this man have been acquitted? He's admitted to doing the shooting, lying there in wait and shooting a person. I entirely understand that. However, what was left to the jury was for the jury to determine whether at the time of pulling the trigger, Dean was acting out his own will or whether he was acting out the will of the father.
Dean Waters killed on orders from his father, and as he attempts to rebuild his life, it's clear many scars remain.
Life's tough, you know, it has its moments, but I'm grateful that, you know, I've got my boys, you know, like, it can always be worse, can't it? You know, like, I mean, I'm healthy, you know, I've got my freedom, you know, and I've got my boys. At the moment, I'm just working through finishing my mechanic ticket.
The boys have grown up to be gentlemen, if I might say, notwithstanding that one has been charged with murder. But how they survived their lifestyle is very hard to believe.
But the one thing I am sure of, that they will be able to face life and cope with it. And I'm not scared of that, because I've ruled them with a rod of iron, and I know every one of my children will thank me for it, and do thank me.
The acquittal of Dean Waters was a landmark event in the annals of Australian criminal justice.
They've just swept Damon Cooper under the carpet again and just forgotten about him.
But the conviction of his friend, Damon Cooper, for manslaughter caused a bitter split between the two formerly close mates. Cooper serves 13 years of his 18-year sentence and remains resentful.
For the other Waters boys, Troy and Guy, boxing continued to be their life. Both were world title contenders. Family friend, boxer Jamie Pittman, knew the Waters boys well and was in awe of Troy's boxing ability.
Troy Waters, one of the best we've ever had, and for my mind, the most underrated fighter we've ever had in history from Australia. Fought for 3 world titles, one of them against a huge Hall of Famer in Terry Norris, who coming into that fight just came off destroying one of the greatest fighters that ever lived, Sugar Ray Leonard. So coming to that fight, I can't imagine how much belief and self-belief he would have had coming to that fight. He got put down in the fight early, and then to land that astonishing right hand that's still on social media today as one of the best fights, the best first 3 rounds in World Championship history.
Troy Waters broke free of the terrible memories of his cruel upbringing and became a loving, tender husband and father before dying in 2018 after a long battle with leukemia. Coming up, how a greedy millionaire businessman uses a group of amateurs to get rid of his wife permanently.
There's an old saying, 7 miles from Sydney and 1,000 miles from Cairns. That's Sydney's famed northern beachside suburb of Manly, a thriving tourist area that rivals Bondi as the city's most popular surfside destination. And in January 1986, the uncrowned king of Manly is Andrew Kazic, millionaire businessman, restaurateur, hotelier, a much-admired community benefactor and pillar of society.
Jean Hay is an influential Manly identity. Like most local community leaders, she's impressed with Kazic's energy and enterprise.
I think it was through the efforts of the Kazic family, building the hotel and all the efforts that particularly Andrew did put in to the business community, both as a businessman and through the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and then he became chairman of the Tourist Promotions Committee, that he really built Manly up again.
Andrew's wife, Megan, is his greatest supporter and a partner in his business and charity work, highly regarded by the local community.
I never ever heard Megan ever say a nasty thing about anybody. She didn't have a nasty bone in her body, and she was the sweetest, nicest woman you could ever meet.
Andrew and Megan appear to be the perfect couple, but all is not as it seems. Andrew is unhappy in the marriage, and early in the morning of January the 27th, it ends in the most dramatic of circumstances. Andrew and Megan have gone to bed. Megan is asleep, but Andrew lies awake as an intruder slips quietly into the house through an unlocked door. Once inside, he removes his shoes and climbs the stairs. He enters the bedroom and fires 2 shots at point-blank range into Megan's head, killing her instantly. Then, 2 more shots thud into Andrew's pillow, narrowly missing him as he rolls off the bed in the nick of time.
Megan, Jesus!
The killer exits the house in the same way he came in. Andrew Kazic raises the alarm. Ambulance paramedics Otmar Niewak and Matt Davis are first at the scene.
We saw a person on the bed. There was a man kneeling at the foot of the bed who looked as if he was in distress. I found out later that it was Mr. Kazic. Matt went over to check the patient. He checked her vital signs. With a swab, he swabbed her cheek, and there was 2 entry holes in her cheek.
Detective Sergeant Bob Inkster arrives at the crime scene to find Andrew Kazic sitting in the lounge room in his pyjamas, along with the other residents of the house, Kazic's 19-year-old son, Andrew Jr., and his mother-in-law, May Carmichael.
Ambulance officers were in attendance, and I was escorted into the bedroom where I saw the body of Megan Kazic laying on the bed, and there was a considerable amount of blood on her and on the bed, and I noticed 2 bullet holes in her left cheek. The crime scene and the circumstances that were obvious were quite bizarre. You know, I'd never heard of an instance where somebody had been shot dead in bed alongside a partner, and then of course it was obvious that shots had been fired in the direction of where Mr. Kazic was laying on the bed, and it was quite unexplainable even at that early stage as why he had not been struck himself.
Later that morning, Detective Sergeant Mike Hagan is called in.
On that morning, I was called out from the homicide squad and joined a team from Manly detectives, and we went to the crime scene. And we carried out our own observations. We looked at the facts and the issues of the crime scene, but something didn't gel, and we were highly suspicious of the circumstances that morning.
Andrews suggests that the killer may have entered through a balcony into the master bedroom. But it has a sliding screen door that makes a loud noise when it's moved, loud enough to awaken the intended victims.
It appeared to us from our observations of the crime scene that this was a related killing. In other words, there was a relationship between the mastermind, or the person who set this crime up, the actual killer and the victim. And we had a gut feeling that this was a related killing.
A police ballistics expert quickly verifies that all the shots were fired at close range.
And it was also quite evident from the ballistics examination that the shots that were fired both into Megan Kazic and in the direction of Andrew Kazic were fired from the side of the bed occupied by Megan. And it was quite obvious, even at that stage, that the distance that the shots were discharged from the firearm was a very short distance. Insofar as the Andrew Kazic was concerned, it would have been within probably about 3 feet. And it was quite amazing, even at that stage, as to why the shots missed him.
So, the intruder has got into the house through an unlocked door, murdered Megan Kazic, and fired 2 more shots at Andrew from point-blank range. And yet Andrew has been able to make a miraculous escape and raise the alarm. Then, during a background check, detectives discover something that really makes them sit up and take notice. Just 17 days before her death, Megan had been attacked in the driveway of her home. Anthony is the Kazic's next-door neighbour.
And I heard a bit of a scuffle, or some running and a scuffle, and this blood-curdling scream. And so, which sounded to me like it was outside my window. I thought someone was being thrown off the balcony. So I decided, well, look, I better go out and see if I can help. I saw her fumbling for keys and trying to get in the front door, and she was pretty messed up. And I just said, oh, look, are you okay? Is everything okay? And she just said, you know, I've been mugged, you know. And I said, oh, really? So I thought, I said to her, look, I'll come down and give you a hand. So we got in touch with the police, and they came to the scene as well.
It seems someone has been determined to get rid of Megan Kazic. Police are highly suspicious of Andrew, but they have no concrete evidence. Soon, though, a police informant will blow the case wide open.
In the weeks after the murder of Sydney socialite Megan Kazic, investigators are making little progress. They suspect her husband, Andrew, but cannot find any concrete evidence against him, although inquiries have revealed he is having an affair with another woman. But then comes a breakthrough. The man heading up the investigation, Detective Sergeant Bob Inkster, receives a call from an old colleague, Detective Sergeant Kevin Woods.
Kevin told me that he had received information from an informant of his who told him he knew about the circumstances surrounding the murder of Megan Kazic and in fact had previously been offered a contract to commit the murder.
The informant is George Canellis, a career criminal who's cultivated a reputation for himself as a gun for hire, a hitman. Bob Inkster and 2 other officers visit Canellis.
And he outlined to us the circumstances about being approached to commit the murder some few weeks prior. He told us of a meeting he had with a Mr. Bill Vandenberg, who supplied him with a firearm, a .22 calibre survival rifle, and it was fitted with a silencer, and he was paid a sum of money with a promise that on completion of the murder he'd be paid a much larger sum.
That sum is $25,000 for the hit, with a down payment of $5,000. Canellis has no idea who has ordered the killing, just that his acquaintance, Bill Vandenberg, is the go-between. Canellis tells police this story. He drove to the Kazic home and followed Megan when she went out. At a local shop, he actually stood right beside her, but then he got cold feet and aborted the planned hit. He then handed back the firearm and silencer to Vandenberg and decided to keep the $5,000 deposit. Canellis says he was introduced to Vandenberg through Vandenberg's best friend, Kerry Orrick. Inkster convinces Canellis to wear a listening device and talk to Vandenberg and Orrick about the contract killing. The 3 of them meet, but the taped conversations do not reveal who ordered the killing. They do show that both Vandenberg and Orrick knew about the murder in advance and that Orrick delivered the murder weapon to Vandenberg. Vandenberg then casually slips in a reference to a man named Warren.
And it became obvious to us at that stage that he had to have been referring to Warren Elkins, who was Andrew Kazic's close confidant, and he was the person who was intended to take over the security contract of the hotel.
Warren Elkins manages the nightclub at Kazic's Manly Pacific Hotel and is pitching for its lucrative security contract. To get it, Elkins will do anything the boss asks of him, perhaps even arrange the murder of Megan. Because there's no direct evidence linking Kazic to the killing, detectives decide to place Vandenberg, Orrick and Elkins under 24-hour surveillance. When nothing comes of that, detectives Bob Inkster and Mike Hagan, armed with a search warrant, visit Bill Vandenberg, still believing him to be no more than a middleman. But Vandenberg drops a bombshell.
In our conversation with Bill Vandenberg that morning, and it was quite surprising what he said, but he told us that he was the person responsible for the murder of Megan Kazic.
Another group of detectives raids the home of Kerry Orrick and are just as stunned when Orrick says to them, "I know what you're here for. It's about that woman that Bill murdered." Meanwhile, Vandenberg details for the detectives his murderous visit to the Kazic home on the morning of January 27. A downstairs doorway left open for him, taking his shoes off and climbing the stairs, entering the bedroom and shooting Megan twice.
He later on told us that by arrangement, he fired 2 shots into the pillow of Andrew Kazic after he had rolled off the bed, and he then ran down the stairway and exited back out through the way in which he came. And his version was totally consistent with the evidence of the crime scene.
Detectives also search Vandenberg's car.
Well, there were 2 bullet holes in the door trim on the front passenger side door, and what he told us is that in his panic to get rid of the firearm, he accidentally discharged 2 shots into the door, and those bullet holes were still quite evident.
Megan Kalazic's funeral is a huge event. Undercover detectives mix with hundreds of mourners, including politicians, local identities, and, of course, Andrew and his extended family. It's testimony to the high esteem in which Megan was held. Meanwhile, Vandenberg tells the detectives that he threw the murder weapon and silencer into the Lane Cove River. Police recover both, and tests confirm the cut-down .22 caliber rifle is, in fact, the murder weapon. Vandenberg is not prepared to name anyone else involved in the conspiracy. He says he fears the man he calls the big bloke, the man who ordered the murder. But Vandenberg does give them more information about the man he'd referred to as Warren, Kalazic's right-hand man, Warren Elkins. Police interview Elkins. Fearing that he will be identified as the killer, he says Andrew Kalazic had approached him to arrange Megan's murder.
The murder was to be committed on the payment of money by Andrew Kazic. In other words, he was the mastermind behind this. He was giving instructions, he was giving directions as to how his wife was to be killed.
Elkins tells the story of his almost comical campaign to find a hitman. He says he headed for Sydney's sleazy King's Cross and eventually met Bill Vandenberg. Vandenberg then approached his friend, Kerry Orrick, who in turn introduced him to George Canellis. Canellis accepted the hit job, but then reneged and kept his $5,000 deposit. When Vandenberg informs Elkins of the situation, Elkins warns him that the boss won't be happy and will seek revenge. He insists that the deposit be repaid and says the hit must be carried out no matter what. Meanwhile, Vandenberg freely tells detectives that he was also responsible for the first bungled attempt to kill Megan Kalazic 17 days prior to her eventual murder.
Yes, he made full admissions as that he intended to murder Megan on that occasion. He said that he hid behind a small vehicle that was parked outside the garage. He knew that Megan would exit the garage through a particular door. As she exited that door, he put the gun up to her head, pulled the trigger, and it didn't go off. And I would suggest that the reason it didn't go off is he'd failed to cock it. That alerted Megan. She turned around, and in a panic, he struck her with the firearm. And he told us that in striking her with the firearm, which he had fitted with a silencer at that stage, the actual silencer broke off, and he fled the scene with the weapon minus the silencer.
Meanwhile, police today continued investigations at the Kalazic home at Fairlight.
That silencer was later found in the grounds of the Kalazic home. Police using metal detectors and a very thorough search after the charging process had taken place.
Elkins is reluctant to go on the record naming Kalazic as the mastermind of the murder plot. He greatly fears the man he calls the boss. He admits he arranged the killing, but denies he pulled the trigger. Bill Vandenberg, after his confession, is charged with murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to murder, and assault. Kerry Orrick is charged with conspiracy to murder. Detectives then re-interview Andrew Kalazic. He tells them he and Megan may have been targets of assassins due to their work within the Croatian community, or his pro-development campaign with the local Chamber of Commerce.
That's what it comes down to.
Under instruction from his lawyer, Kalazic refuses to say any more, leaving police with no strong, direct connection between the shooter, Vandenberg, and the suspected mastermind, Kalazic. But they have uncovered another of Andrew's extramarital affairs.
We're able to ascertain some information concerning a past relationship that Andrew had with a former employee, Lydia Ewerman. She was a very impressive lady and a lady of very good standing. And she told us of a love affair that she had with Andrew that dated back some years and that went for some years.
Lydia Human gives police letters which confirm their affair while Andrew was still married to Megan. But is it motive enough to kill his wife? Investigators also discovered that in 1973, Andrew Kazic escaped injury after leaping from his car before it careered down a cliff near the family home, with his wife and son still trapped inside. Amazingly, no one was injured. Bob Inkster is convinced that that was Andrew's first attempt to kill Megan. Inkster decides to arrest Andrew Kazic.
You better know what you're doing.
You are under arrest, all right.
6 months after Megan's slaying, Andrew Kazic faces committal proceedings. He's represented by the eminent criminal lawyer Chester Porter QC. The charges are dismissed because of a lack of firm evidence linking Kazic directly to the murder.
We knew we were always going to be up against it, but at the same time, we were in it for the long haul. And of course, we knew that sometime down the track, Vandenberg was going to be sentenced, as was Kerry Orrick, and both of them were also most likely to give evidence to support a Crown case against Andrew Kazic. It was only a matter of time.
But Kazic is already planning to eliminate a key witness.
This morning, he was at the local court.
Andrew Kazic has been charged with the murder of his wife Megan, but the charges have been dismissed because of a lack of evidence. Aware that further evidence might implicate him, Andrew Kazic pays $10,000 to his right-hand man, Warren Elkins, to persuade Vandenberg to retract his evidence. But police are aware of the plot and Elkins is arrested.
He was charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, and he was also charged at that time with conspiracy to murder Bill Vandenberg.
Offered indemnity from prosecution, Elkins admits to test firing the murder weapon in the presence of Andrew Kazic. He says it was fired into telephone books lying up against a wall in Kazic's private office.
They found that the projectiles had actually gone through the telephone books and had dented the aluminium ducting that went around the bottom of the floor. We later executed a search warrant on that office. We found the dents that were outlined to us by Elkins, and behind the ducting was some very small pieces of paper with some type on them.
Elkins also tells police of no less than 4 previous bungled murder attempts on Megan Kazic. Bill Vandenberg confirms his story.
He told me that on one occasion he walked up the top of the stairs, and in the room immediately opposite the stairway on the left-hand side was a TV room, and he saw a young boy laying on the floor there watching television, and he decided he wasn't going to go in and commit the crime at that time, and he quietly exited the home without being caught.
Inkster now knows there's enough evidence for the Attorney-General to issue what's known as an ex officio indictment against Kazic. In other words, a trial without a committal hearing. A year and a half after Megan's murder, Andrew Kazic is finally made to face justice. Elkins has made a deal with prosecutors and gives vital evidence which helps finally convict Kazic. Vandenberg, Elkins and Canellis all testify against him. Finally, after a 12-week trial in which Kazic continues to protest his innocence, he is convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Our family is 100% behind Andrew, and we're lodging an appeal.
Kerry Orrick is sentenced to life for conspiracy to murder. Bill Vandenberg also faces life in jail and feels enormous guilt and remorse.
That was the catalyst then for Vandenberg, with a tremendous amount of guilt, not only for the murder of Megan Kazic, but being the reason why his best friend got life imprisonment, decided to end his life.
Vandenberg takes an overdose of sleeping tablets and is later found dead in his cell. Warren Elkins, having done a deal with prosecutors, is sentenced to just 5 years in jail. That should be the end of the story, but Andrew Kazic has powerful friends. After years of lobbying, a rare judicial inquiry is ordered into his conviction, but it backfires badly. Kazic had claimed all along that he was lying with his head on his pillow when the 2 bullets thudded into it. At the inquest, forensic expert Robert Barnes proves conclusively that Kazic is a liar.
In relation to the pillow, examination of that was able to show again conclusively that Mr. Kazic's head could not have been on the pillow because the trajectory, the path the bullet fired through that pillow was straight when the pillow was not compressed, whereas had his head been present on the pillow, it would have been curved when the pillow was not compressed.
Robert Barnes also provides ballistic evidence to prove beyond doubt that the gun Bill Vandenberg threw in the Lane Cove River was the weapon that killed Megan. The judicial inquiry confirms emphatically Andrew Kazic was complicit in the murder of his wife. From prison, Kazic continued to campaign on his own behalf, which only caused his family more unnecessary grief.
And I have a genuine sorrow for the family of Andrew Kazic, and they just simply don't deserve to be put under this type of pressure.
The murder of Megan Kazic remains one of the most infamous killings in Sydney's history. At the age of 71, after serving 25 years in prison, Andrew Kazic is released on parole in February 2012.
Have you got anything to say? Okay, thank you for coming.
Andrew has always maintained his innocence. Does he still do that today? That's silly.
2 corrective services officers drove him from the grey walls of Silverwater Prison and took him to his sister's home in Manly.
Are you happy to be home, Andrew?
The place where once he was known as the uncrowned king.